Hello and welcome everyone to the latest segment of our new series, SCMP Conversations Healthcare. This time we'll be discussing the investment opportunities that can be had in the healthcare sector. We're delighted to be joined today by a distinguished panel, including Simone Song, who is the founder and senior partner of Ori Capital, Andrew Wong, Regional Vice President for Early Innovation Partnering at Johnson & Johnson Innovation Asia Pacific, and Andy Wong, Head of Innovation and Technology with Invest HK. On a global scale, there's never been more opportunity for investment and innovation in the healthcare sector than there is right now. For the Asia Pacific region, demand for healthcare is on target to continue its growth in the coming years, bolstered by its aging population, focused funding from policymakers, and innovators working rapidly to deliver new products to fulfill unmet demand. Before we dive into the discussion around the current healthcare investment landscape, I want to inform all of our viewers that we encourage you to ask questions to our panelists. You can do so by using the Q&A function in the webinar platform. Send your questions in as soon as you can so we can get them over to the panelists. We'll be reserving some time at the end for your questions. To begin, I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So Andrew, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Clark. Andrew Wong, Vice President of Transactions and Early Innovation Partnering for Johnson & Johnson Innovation Asia Pacific. I manage the early stage business development and collaboration activities in the region for our Johnson & Johnson sectors, three sectors, pharmaceuticals, medical device, and consumer health. My team and I will identify, develop, and execute partnerships with a diverse set of partners in the region, from biotech companies, venture capital firms, nonprofit organizations, governments, and academic institutions. And we have offices throughout Asia in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Seoul, Tokyo, Singapore, and Australia.
Thanks, Andrew. Simone.
I'm Simone Song, glad to be here. And I'm the founder and senior partner of Ori Capital. Ori Capital manages two healthcare funds, and the mission of the fund is to battle the three largest and deadliest diseases, that they are cancer, cardio, and neurodegeneratives, and we're based in Hong Kong. Very happy to be here.
Thanks, Simone. And Andy.
Thank you. So I'm Andy Wong. I'm from Invest Hong Kong. Invest Hong Kong is a government agency who help the foreign company to set up the business in Hong Kong. And I take care of innovation and technologies. And throughout our 31 office over the world, so we do promotion to promote Hong Kong to be a good place for investment. And then we assist the company like Johnson & Johnson or any other startup to scale up or MNC to set up the business in Hong Kong. I took care of the innovation and particular for the healthcare service. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, so to kick things off, I think I'd like to, ask you guys to set the scene of what the current healthcare investment landscape looks like. I think as most people watching probably know, COVID-19 obviously played a huge role in, boosting a lot of investment that's happened over the course of, the last year and a half. What could you describe, it was already becoming a thing before that. It's not like this is a new thing, but it obviously boosted it up. Could you describe the impact that COVID-19 had on the healthcare investment sector, and then any lessons learned over the course of maybe the last year and a half that you'll take, moving forward?
Yes, Clark, I think the pandemic definitely, in my mind, highlighted the importance of collaboration. And I think we saw how collaboration really contributed and accelerated the fight towards COVID-19. And I think it helped us to understand and to glean sort of the fundamental knowledge for the basis of COVID-19 disease, and also helped us to accelerate the acceleration of solutions to treat COVID-19 as well. And I think more than ever, we are of the belief that innovation can happen anywhere. We've seen a lot of that here in the Asia Pacific, and we also believe that the trends that we've seen from as a result of the pandemic are only accelerating certain aspects. In addition to just the support for overall biopharma and therapeutics, medical device solutions, we're also seeing sort of this cross-sector, digital health, telemedicine, And I think this pandemic has accelerated what we already saw were trends happening, but just having it creating sort of an acceleration of that because of the need by necessity for access to patients and how to interact more remotely.
There was I think, a little bit of a trend where when COVID first started, that a lot of things that maybe had a focus, like let's say what's cardiac arrest or something like that. It kind of, the focus turned mainly toward COVID-19, and some things were set aside. Is that still the trend, or has it normalized a little bit in that respect?
I think you definitely have seen a tremendous effort in infectious disease to fight issues such as COVID. But at the same time, I think just overall broad investment across the board in biopharmaceuticals has continued to be quite strong, and we continue to invest a significant amount. I think in last year alone, we put in $20.2 billion in R&D, and we are continuing to increase that investment across the board.
Thanks, Andrew. And Simone, your experience over the course of the past year and a half, and how has COVID-19 helped to shape the way that you currently approach things?
We see a lot more things now, right? Before COVID, messenger RNA was a alienated term, but now it's part of the household conversation. But as investors, all of a sudden we see, a lot more things, a lot more technologies are brought to us. The list is very long, but we can start with RNA, messenger RNA, which is used to express a wanted protein. But we're also looking at RNA interference, RNA silencing, which are used to stop translating an unwanted gene. And we'll also look at the RNA editing, which can go both ways. And aside from RNA, we're also looking at DNA editing, for example, or the new generation CRISPR. And it's very encouraging to even think that sometimes by knocking out one gene, one treatment can be effective, can last for a lifetime. So the list is very long. The overwhelming impact is that now a lot of things are sped up. We see a lot more things, and we see translation from lab to the real world is at the speed we have not seen. That partly due to a lot more money coming into our sector.
Sure.
Which is good.
I'm curious if you might be able to just kind of off the cuff here say, is there something that you learned over let's say, was there something that you thought you knew about healthcare investment before COVID-19 that maybe you were like totally wrong about, that COVID-19 was like completely turned things around?
Yes, the speed at which the vaccine or drug can be developed. Now we have a vaccine. We have different kinds of vaccines on the market, and we have therapeutics on the market. So to Andrew's point, the urgency and the collaboration can put a life-saving therapy or vaccine to the market at a speed we never saw.
Right. Okay, Andy, I'll switch over to you. You're specifically involved with Hong Kong's healthcare ecosystem, in particular when it comes to government funding and incentives. Could you describe to the audience a bit more about what the government offers when it comes to the healthcare investment sector?
Thank you for the question. So first of all, the government is very committed to the innovation and technologies. Right, over the last 4 years, the government has already spent $130 billion into the overall I&T, or innovation and technologies, which driving say for example, for the academic research, for the R&D facility establishment, and also some other incubation program that happening in the science park or cyberport. In terms of the funding, for example, there's a different types of funding which is under the fund called Innovation and Technology Fund. The first one is about the matching fund, which is the name called Enterprise Support Scheme, and also the other one is Partnership Research Program. They are quite similar, and one is 2 years program, one is 3 years program. And then the idea is that the government put $1, and then the enterprise will also put $1 for matching the funding scheme. So apart from the funding scheme, and there's also other things like tax deduction. For example, if you are doing the R&D, you are eligible for the tax deduction up to the 40% of the R&D expenditure. And also there's some also other tax bracket for the three times of the 2 million of tax profit you generate. So that means 6 million as well. So there's also other incubation program available at the Science Park, which is also being subsidized for the incubation program as well. So thank you.
Right, thanks, Andy. So, Simone, I'll go back to you. You know, one of the things that's I think top of mind for a lot of people, you know, diving into the healthcare investment landscape, especially recently, is the notion that valuations are incredibly high these days. So, I'd like to hear if you could describe to the audience how you approach the notion of high valuations. You know, how has your strategy, I guess, changed? You know, in light of this, and you know, who are you seeing? You know. The market makers of this, you know, what are the trends that you're seeing in that respect?
When there's a lot of money, of course, the valuation will be driven up, and we can never fight that. We don't know how to fight high valuation. The strategy is to go early, to even go to the stage where we can incubate companies. But by doing that, the requirement on the manager, of course, is very high to overcome the technology barriers. To be an early stage investor, basically, we are looking at 3 key bottlenecks. One is, how do you quantify technology risk? It could be binary, 1 or 0. B, you know, the early you invest, the harder it is to search for those young companies. That's the second bottleneck. The third bottleneck, which is I think the hardest of all, is these young companies, you need to raise them. You can't flip them to the market tomorrow. You have the mentality to be both mother and father.
Sure. So, you know, for anyone watching, I'm sure, you know, you talked about getting in early. How does one approach doing that?
Okay, for us, we have become a quantamental investor, meaning we combine quantitative big data analysis with fundamental research. At Ori, we have developed a AI research platform where we have created a set of alternative data of 50,000 healthcare companies, and the platform, you know, narrows it down from 15,000 of all kinds of healthcare companies to about 4,000 companies in our focus area. I talked about 3 key disease focuses. And based on this 3 key disease focus, we also developed expertise. We probably will focus on 10 scientific approaches we believe that are mature to manage these 3 diseases. So the machine will further narrow it down to about 1,000 companies based on the 10 approaches we understand. And so far, it narrows down to about 50 companies, and then, you know, we will human capital will come in to deep refine the company, so that the AI research platform is almost like our chief data officer.
Right. And is the AI platform done in-house, or do you?
In-house. It's developed in-house, and it's only for our own use.
Right. Cool. Andrew, and that you know,
Yes.
the valuations question to you.
Yes. Now, valuation is an important consideration, and we try to be disciplined about that. We will take typically a pretty fundamental approach to in that case. But just to comment on sort of the high valuations, if the valuation is what we consider to be high and difficult for us, we will try to find an alternative, comparable investment if possible. We will typically also, when we are looking to make an investment in a company, try to be fair, both to the company, the partner, as well as to ourselves. And so we will take your traditional approaches, risk-adjusted net present value approach. We'll look at comparables. We'll use certain valuation guidelines that we think are representative of this, let's say, early stage opportunity. And then we find other ways to also, so that's typically how we will address the valuation aspect. There are other ways that we can also mitigate some of, I would say, risk going forward. Simone was talking about as you go earlier stage, the probability of success of that program actually reaching market is increasingly lower. So we try to structure our investments in a way, or our partnerships in a way, that we risk mitigate that over time.
And with rising valuations, that obviously means more players are coming into the market. What does that look like as far as, again, I guess let's say pre-COVID? What now? How has that changed as far as the players that are entering the market?
I'll try to tackle that first.
Sure. Yeah.
I think what we are seeing is I would say, we were talking about collaboration, for example. I think there's just increasing discernment about the quality of the science. And so one aspect there is really taking the time to differentiate or understand the differentiation of that opportunity. And how does that fall both from a regional but also global competitive landscape basis. So I think differentiation is one aspect in which how to understand or to screen out for valuation differential, for example, between opportunities.
Sure. And that, Simone, since you invest globally, correct? So,
Yes.
I'm curious. I think our audience is probably interested as well. The rise of special purpose acquisition companies, SPACs. Has that had any type of impact on your approach to investing? Is it something you're paying attention to? And if so, or if not, what is your thoughts around that? What should people be paying attention to when it comes to SPACs? I know it's not a huge thing in Asia as of yet, but
SPAC is a way of raising fund by going to the public market. So I don't have a strong opinion as to good or bad the SPACs are, but as an investor, I invest, and for the next round of investing, there's a very high probability that our company will go to the market. What I care is the quality of investor or quality of the SPAC, and there's a lot of money, as you said, flushing into our sector post-COVID. Especially what we didn't see before, now we're seeing is that very young companies are being taken to the public market. For example, companies as young as at preclinical stage. It's a blessing in disguise, because on one hand, that early technology can be validated by investing community, but on the other hand, that young companies make mistakes. As a child growing up, you will fall. Breaking as long as you don't break your neck, but breaking arm, breaking legs. But if you are in the public domain, then all the spotlights are on you, and a benign mistake can prove fatal. For example, the share price drops substantially when you're at the point you need to raise your next round. It's very difficult to justify when you are a public company.
Right, thanks. Andy, I'm curious if you could shed some light, going back to government funding for Hong Kong. Do you have any numbers as far as the amount of companies or entrepreneurs who have benefited through this? And then I think our viewers might also be interested in if you could share what type of criteria does someone need in order to qualify to get some of these benefits?
Okay, thank you for the question. So I think to give some numbers, right? So the fund I mentioned earlier is an Innovation and Technology Fund. So it's up in 1990 something, and then so far cumulative, I think the amount is up to 25 billion has been awarded to different projects. This translates to for the biomedical is around about 6%, which is translating to about 1.4 billion, and then in 2020. So the total funding awarded to the project is around 3 billion. And then out of the 3 billion is around 300 something million belongs to the biomedical. So you can see that cumulative, the average is around 6%. But for the 2020 is around 11%. There's an increase of the biomedical percentage out of the total funding. So people are more focused on using the money for biomedical development. So I think it's a very good number. The reason behind, because Hong Kong is quite top-notch in terms of the biomedical academic development, and also the R&D facility at the science park as well. So, and also different things add together, which drive the people who want to invest into the biomedical. In terms of the assessment for the awarding the funding, there are a couple of factors to drive it. So first of all, we want to look at the product and the service, how deep is the scientific research in this project. So what is the deep tech element into the project? The second thing is we want to know what is the management. Are they skillful and are the technical capability to deliver the project? I think you, as you are investor, you also look at these two key elements, right? And then the third one is it's about the financial capability of the company, right? So at least we have to make sure that they are financially viable. And the fourth one is about the business model. How can they commercialize the product? They have a good market potential for the product development. Of course, from the government perspective, this may not be the crucial one, but we need to, because our taxpayer money, so we need to make sure that the money we spend on the project, there's a future for the project to thrive. And the last one is more for the government type, is whether it's aligned with the policy address, which is our long-term goal from the government perspective. So thank you.
All right, thanks. And is it more people coming to you, or do you also have, a search, that you guys do? Do you put out the feelers, or are people more coming to you?
Right. I think the people more, we do both, because as we are the promotion agent, so we promote our how Hong Kong or why Hong Kong to different parts of the world. So people come to us, and then for the vetting process, we do rely on the expertise from the market. So it's more like a co-investment scheme in one of the called Innovation and Technology Venture Fund. So we rely on the expertise from the public or the expertise professional who are the professional investor to do the vetting for the good project for the government.
All right, thanks, Andy. Before I go on to the next question, I just want to remind our audience that you can submit questions to our panelists. You can do so using the Q&A function. We'll reserve some time for your questions at the end, so be sure to get yours in. The next question, I think, going along similar to the notion of criteria. When you're looking for innovative companies, what is the criteria you're looking for? How does someone prove that what they're doing is innovative? Particularly because I think you already talked about, I think Simone talked about timelines. It could be at least a 10-year timeline, probably at minimum for a lot of these. So, what are you looking for? How can they prove that they're innovative now, but also that what they're doing is going to be innovative 10 years down the road or something like that?
Yeah, we will, there are certain, we always talk about this and how to bridge or how to meet or exceed the market expectations by the time your program gets to market. And I think that's really important because market expectations continue to evolve, they continue to advance. And so really trying to meet that is a particular challenge. But one thing that we think about and what we focus on are really transformational innovations. And what we mean by transformational innovations are ones that might change the standard of care, might shift a particular system to a new framework that will be viable for the future. And so this is what we're looking for. An analogy might be, the better candle versus a light bulb. Better candle being incremental innovation, light bulb being, transformational. And so that's what we're really looking for. We look at that in the quality of the science, and what I mean by quality of science is also that differentiating aspect and the data to support that. Andy talked about experienced entrepreneurial team. That's very important for us as well in order to execute on this and to work with us. And then aspects we talked about, the global competitive aspect that will differentiate the program to enable it to sort of float or rise among the others to meet those needs. I think when we think about long time frame, and the other aspect there is drug development or medical technology development often takes a long time. It's complex. So when we're forecasting out, there are a lot of, as we all know, studies, clinical trials that have to be done, both preclinical, that's pre-human, as well as human clinical studies where we're looking at safety and efficacy. And so because of that time frame and the amount of study and work that we have to do to demonstrate, to validate the efficacy, validate the safety, that's what causes that time frame of 10 plus years or so very often. And so we will look at each of these different areas and help and work with these companies as we invest in them over that long run.
So you gave a analogy of the candle to the light bulb. I wonder, is there a healthcare industry analogy that you might be able to give of something that's been transformational in that way?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different interesting. We made some pretty significant investments here, even in Asia Pacific. One example was our investment in a CAR T cell therapy with Legend Biotech. It's a subsidiary of GeneScript, which is publicly traded. This was a new modality that we wanted to get into in cell therapy, where we were seeing very strong early effectiveness as well as durability of response. And so this is really harnessing the patient's immune system to help eradicate a hematological cancer, in this case multiple myeloma. And we made that investment because we saw this as one of the new modalities of the future that we thought would take hold. And lo and behold, so far as we've continued to support this Legend in its clinical studies, we've seen response rates of 98%, which is just unthinkable, in terms of cancer in some ways. And these sustained responses in a majority of these patients that are, I've been through a number of different regimens. I think this is, very transformational in the area of hematological cancers. Another area that we've, invested in is in the area of medical technology, where we are really transforming some of the ways we address surgery and for lung cancer, a very devastating disease. One of our subsidiaries now is Auris Health, and we have this Monarch platform, which actually guides the physicians to visually see, to visually understand what is happening in the periphery of the lung, to actually to more accurately and minimally invasively take biopsies of lung nodules that may be cancerogenic. And this is something that's really going to transform the area in lung cancer, where we are really transforming the diagnosis as well as early interception of lung cancer.
Right, thanks so much. Fascinating stuff. And Simone, I want to throw that to you as well, just the notion of criteria. What are you looking for when you're going to an early stage company, for example?
Andrew used the word transformer.
Yeah.
I use a different word, but essentially it has the same meaning. I use the word disruptive. So at the end, I'm sure Johnson & Johnson already look at the same things, patient benefits, to treat untreatable diseases, to manage unmanageable conditions. So as we invest in very early stage companies, of course we'll think about the commercialization capability down the road as the companies grow. But to make an early statement, we look at 10 principles, what I jokingly call it 10-finger principles. So we look at the left-hand 5 principles. Starts with the first question: is basic research done? Is biology understood of certain approach, of certain target? And we have to see that there is a clear scientific bloodline in order to trace it back, in order to answer that very important question. First question is, do we understand the science and technology, or down to the approach, down to the target level? Although we only look at 3 major diseases, but when we talk about therapeutics, it always boils down to a target or 2 targets, and we're talking about thousands of them. So that's a big question to answer. And the second is this a platform technology? Because we can't afford one trick pony. And the third criteria is the quality of discovery data, how this molecule behaves pre-human. And of course, we have to look at, if there are human data, we'll look at the human data. And we will look at its IP positions, freedom to operate. That takes care of the science part. But more importantly, we have to look at the human part. We have to look at the professionalism, the quality of the management. A lot of times that if we look at a company run by the scientific founder, we probably run, because the skill required to run a business entity is completely different from a scientist being great at the lab stage. So we will look at the quality of the CEO and the quality of his translational team. and the quality of the shareholders, whether they will be there to support the company or flip the company, and the quality of the board, etc. So that forms 10 fingers.
Right. I mean, it's so many factors that need to be. I was going to ask, like, both of you, if there was, I don't know if you could put into just one sentence or one word, something that is a factor of a company that makes you want to go. Like, it has this factor and you'll go. It doesn't sound like there's one thing though. It's many things that have to be
But
considered.
most importantly, science and people.
Yeah.
And talking about CAR T, Johnson & Johnson legend have done a marvelous job, just eye-opening and moving job by giving liquid cancer some of the answers by using CAR T therapy. But liquid tumor is 10% of the tumor. Now, CAR T therapy is being experimented to treat solid tumor. So if I see, using CAR T therapy to treat solid tumor, if the science is there,
Right.
if the team is there, that would make me jump.
Sure, great. So switching over, Andy, just the notion of Hong Kong's startup ecosystem. What is that looking like these days?
Okay, maybe I just give you some figures, right? So Invest Hong Kong, we do have a program called Start Me Up. So it's an annual program. So throughout the program, we mingle different people together, including the startup, the investor, or the business partner together. According to our statistic, to work together with the Census and Statistics Department, so for the 2021, we have 3,755, if I remember correctly, kind of a startup in Hong Kong. Compared to 2017, which is about 68% increase of the startup numbers. In terms of the people or the co-working space or the accelerator or incubator, to drive it is almost 100%. It's double since 2017, which is now is about 124 kind of incubator or accelerator in Hong Kong to drive the startup community. So this is amazing, which is very going promising in Hong Kong for the startup community. To look at the ecosystem, we look at two things. One is about the kind of the funding or investment because we need the money in order to help the startup to grow, right? So in Hong Kong is fascinating. We have someone here to help people to drive the startup community. We also have family office in Hong Kong. So, and also we have a government funding, which is one funding called Innovation and Technology Venture Fund. It's a $2 billion kind of funding. It's a 1-to-2 kind of arrangement, one from the government, two from the co-investor, from the private sector, which is a joint force to invest. And also there's a corporate venture fund funded by two particular institutes. One is Science and Technology Park, which is 600 million. The other is a Cyber Park, 400 million. So they also help the incubatee in the Science Park or Cyber Park to help them to grow, right? And also there's one more I want to mention. It's about something, not sure whether you heard about, is a City University. They also have a $500 million funding to support the alumni, to help them to start up their venture. So it's a target of helping 300 companies. That's why it's called Hong Kong Tech 300. 300 startups within 3 years to help them to grow. So this is driven by the university itself. So this is amazing. And then another one we would like to talk about help the startup is from the maybe from the R&D infrastructure perspective, particular for the Hong Kong Science and Technology Park, which is led by Professor John Kao, under the new cluster called Institute for Translation Research. Okay. Because biomedical is a depth of valley. He always said that it's a depth of valley. How can we level the valley to make it people can walk from the early stage all the way to commercialization? Yeah. So not to drop off the valley. So they are developing different kind of programs, right? So InQBio is definitely the one to help them. But within the InQBio, they also knows that clinical research is a big headache for the company. So they have a translation catalyst research program to help them to do the clinical trial with certain percentage of money to invest into the clinical trial. As well as for the medical device, they have a newly will be upcoming kind of a medical device lab to help them to resolve all those testing and also regulatory issues. So from the start in Hong Kong, we have the funding, we have the R&D infrastructure, and also some other policy to help them to grow in Hong Kong.
Thanks, Andy. So, sticking with Hong Kong's startup ecosystem, I'd like to hear your thoughts on where it currently is, particularly compared to other parts of Asia. Are there challenges and roadblocks that still need to be overcome? Where does Hong Kong sit? Let's say in comparison to, say, mainland China or Singapore. Andrew, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think about some of the innovation hubs, Singapore was one of the early with Biopolis, and shortly behind there you have Shanghai, Suzhou, Beijing, which are pretty large, significant innovation hubs of life sciences. That said, I think we just heard I think it was the 14th five-year plan indicating that Hong Kong is to be sort of the international innovation hub, right?
Correct.
And so I think that's going to be quite tremendous to see that. I think the ample funding that you get both from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and VCs like Simone is tremendous to have. The public-private partnership that you'll get also from Hong Kong is very supportive. And then finally, I think another aspect is the continual connection of Hong Kong with the Greater Bay Area. And we're seeing that whether it's from commercialization, market access pilots that are happening right now via Hong Kong into mainland China to accelerate that market access. I think these are all ingredients that will support more and more innovation here.
Definitely. So those are all great things. What does Hong Kong still need to do better?
I think continue to do what I think the trajectory that we're hearing about, which is getting the government-related support or public support also for private innovation. I think will be very supportive on that front. The incubation that is happening, I think a key part here is, and we've talked about this among our group, is translation. Translating the innovations more and more, thinking not just regionally, but also on a global basis of how the innovation here could meet the needs of the region, but also globally. And that's a competitive standpoint of how to differentiate, your innovations.
Right. And Simone, to you, your thoughts in general, especially as a company who invests globally, what does Hong Kong look like in your eyes compared to other locations?
Hong Kong, to me, when Ori invests, we are stage agnostic and geography agnostic. So it's all about whether the technology can be translated and ultimately provide patient care, patient benefits. And I think, sitting where I am today, I'm very hopeful because China has, to me, Hong Kong is part of China, and China has become used to be the supplier of inexpensive labor, but now China is a supplier of huge pool of supply of very qualified scientists and engineers. So we see, just starting from last year, I think last year is the time we see the meaning for a breakthrough in terms of Chinese science being recognized. You see nowadays, it'll only take 1 year for people to realize now that global pharma at very, very large scale, J&J and Legend collaboration is a very good example, and it probably started from there. And then you see farmers of all sizes knocking on the door of biotech or pharmaceutical companies in China to out-license, to license their early stage assets. So we have the skills, and we have the skills, we have the people, we have the size.
Sure.
So I think that Hong Kong and China, being part of China, will be the supply of those sciences and early stage assets.
And if there were, one recommendation, again, what can Hong Kong do better? What would be something that, it still needs, a little help, or, what what can be done to make the ecosystem better than it is right now?
Yeah, ecosystem is the key, right?
Yeah.
Technologies will not walk out of the lab and translate themselves. So the ecosystem includes the government support, includes needs very bold entrepreneurs, needs regulatory support, needs the infrastructure in terms of having the services from CIO, CMO, etc. But I think the most important piece here is capital, not only from the a government sponsorship. It needs to have a community of early stage investors. And for that, I think Boston, Shanghai, Beijing, or Shenzhen have done a better job. We're starting.
How does that happen?
Pardon?
How can Hong Kong get more early stage capital? What can be done to begin that process?
It would, the government, a lot of help from the government, matching, etc.
Okay.
And it would take, just like it takes entrepreneurs, biotech, healthcare entrepreneurs to start business, it takes bold investors to start business here and support early innovations here as well.
Okay, great. So Andy, Andrew mentioned the GBA.
Right.
Curious, how has, what impact does the GBA have when it comes to, again, the healthcare and ecosystem, when it comes to investment? Surely with, the intention of collaborating between Hong Kong and, Guangdong province has an impact on the sector. So what are your thoughts around that?
Right. I think GBA is very interesting. When we talk to the investor, almost like my impression is that GBA equal to opportunity.
True.
Right, it's true, right? So maybe I start with the GBA, which is the 9+2 concept, which is the 9 cities in mainland China and then 2 Hong Kong and Macau. So talking about 86 million of people, which is more than 10 times of population in Hong Kong, 1.7 trillion GDP, which is same size as Canada. So you can, that's why people will translate the GBA equal to opportunity. And then from this, how can we collaborate with the GBA and then make use of the synergy between Hong Kong and also the mainland China? I think, first of all, Hong Kong, as you know, we have the science park, but this is not enough. So that's why we have another one, which is called Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation and Technology Park, which is on the border between the Hong Kong side, which is the Lok Ma Chau. If you live in Hong Kong, you know that where it is. And then the border in the Shenzhen. So that is about 80-something hectares, which is 3 times the size of Science Park. So you can imagine, so it's much bigger size in there. And according to the Chief Executive Policy Address, which was announced very recently, so they is going to put 16 health lab, which is from the Inno Hong Kong, which is the top-notch kind of a university collaboration project. 16 of them will put in there, plus 8 state key laboratory from the China. So we'll build an Inno Health hub in this area. So in the longer term, which will become a very scientific advance into that area. And this is not enough. And the government already announced that we'll put the Suntin, which is another big piece of land, which is nearby the Hong Kong Shenzhen Innovation Park, to become the Silicon Valley, what we call. So make it much bigger, which is called Suntin Metropolitan, or Suntin, huge area over there. So to collaborate with another side across the border in the Shenzhen, and then mix them all together to become the one Song 2 Park. Right? So the two areas added together because of the proximity between the two parks. So people can commute to work over there, and then we are going to sort out the visa in the longer term so that people can commute into the park. Doesn't mean that we'll leave the border as well. So we'll drive the collaboration easier. This is the hardware facility to drive the collaboration in the one nearby area in the what we call Suntin, which is unknown to most people. But later on, I think most people will know where is Suntin sooner or later. And this is from the infrastructure side to drive it. And from the funding side, there's also joint funding scheme between Hong Kong and also in the Guangdong area, and also mainland China. This is the joint funding scheme. Whenever you have a project which is happening to be in Hong Kong and also in China, there's a funding scheme available. And then the last part is about the policy address, some measure happening. So for example, one of the people will talk about is the company use the kind of a medical device or the drugs which is in use in Hong Kong can be used in the designated medical institute in the Shenzhen area, which is the Shenzhen Hong Kong University Shenzhen Hospital. It's the first one who tried this, and it's very successful because it's high demand of this kind of drugs and also medical device.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks, Andy. So before we get into the audience questions, we have some questions coming in, so thank you for those. Do continue submitting them if you have them. I want to ask each of you, Simone and Andrew, looking forward, looking ahead now, where do you see some of the best opportunities for investment in the coming years, or maybe more simply put, what has you excited?
Yes, so we are focused at Johnson & Johnson on our key therapeutic areas. So in the pharma area, it's going to be in oncology, immunology, infectious disease, cardiovascular, retina, pulmonary hypertension. We also have a consumer health area. A big focus within the Asia Pacific is in skin health. And in the medical device area, a big portion is in orthopedics, for example. And so these are all areas that we believe the Asia Pacific and Greater China offers innovation. We feel very, very strongly about it, hence why we have the presence that we do here. So within those strategic areas of interest, we have been investing very significantly over the last couple of years in a number of different companies, a number of different institutes. And so I think going forward, I would say we are continuing to see that strength. I think the other area where we are also seeing some significant trend is in digital health. And so just with the strength, particularly with China, but also other countries within the Asia Pacific, I think this will continue to be an area where we're going to see a lot of innovation and what we call cross-sector application to what we're doing.
Right. Yeah. And Simone?
Yeah. We focus on three big diseases, and we use therapeutics, drug delivery, and diagnostics to help defeat. That's our dream, right? These three diseases. So if we look at if I focus on therapeutics, we are excited about in the areas of oncology especially, we again focus on immuno-oncology. Within immuno-oncology, we have further zooming to CAR T therapies, using oncolytic virus to treat cancer, and using a tri-specific, meaning a molecule can recognize two cancer antigens and also recognize a T cell or NK cell engager. These are, I don't want to bore you with such details, but we are very heavily focused on oncology. Continue to focus on oncology, and as I said, from scientific point of view, we focus more on immuno-oncology. And also to manage cancer, the earlier you find it, the better. Cancer cells are like AR cells, very difficult to defeat. So we invested in cancer testing company, and we hope to be able to invest in early cancer early detection. And in the cardiovascular area, we zoom into DNA editing. Hope that once you knock out this gene and that gene, and it will be a one treatment, good for lifetime type of impact or treatment.
Thanks, Simone. So let's go to our first audience question here. This is a bit of a tough one. I don't know how great of an answer might be able to be brought here, but I'm going to throw it to you first, Simone.
Andy's going to answer that. So Andy's going to take it.
So this is from Grace Pan. She asks, the digital health industry, more commonly known as internet healthcare, is a rapidly emerging field in China. WeDoctor filed its long-awaited IPO application to the Hong Kong Exchange in April. We have participated in the process concerning WeDoctor IPO affairs. Could you give us some suggestions concerning financing and policies hindering the WeDoctor IPO?
I have not studied enough in WeDoctor, so
right.
Obviously I cannot comment on a particular case. But digital health is the trend. It's technology-wise, it's not, especially COVID. You can see that, right? Digitalizing healthcare practices or using AI to discover drugs, using AI to understand the structure, protein structure. That's a trend that cannot be reversed. The question is business execution. We're investors. We do need return on our dollar. So a lot in terms of internet health in China, there are a lot of internet hospitals, but a lot of them are dormant. So the difficulty is at the business execution. Who will pay for that? Who will pay for the data? Who will use the data? And who will pay for them? Once you have these questions answered, that can be an investment opportunity.
Great, thanks. Andrew, I'm going to throw this one to you. This is from Franz Rossler. What will be the post-COVID reality for international collaboration in healthcare? Europe and the US have seen the dependency on medical supplies like masks from China and Asia. China and Asia have seen that for vaccine development from the US and Europe, expertise is still vital. Will we now see a drive to become less dependent on others, more nationalism on local health products, etc.?
Yeah, I think in terms of the types of innovations we're looking for, typically we are looking for innovations in the Asia-Pacific region for global or for the world. And so I think, when we're thinking about healthcare, this really spans boundaries, countries, and so the collaboration that we've done has, whether it's in China, in the US, or US and Europe, or US and India, that hasn't slowed us down in terms of our international collaboration. I think if anything, the pandemic has accentuated what we can do as global collaborators in many ways. So I think there's often a disconnect between the geopolitical and the sort of the corporate or what we might be doing. I think the area where there is some sensitivity, however, is in data privacy, or let's say, I would say, probably in the area of artificial intelligence. So there is greater regulation, probably on both sides, just in terms of how that data is shared, who has access to it, what you can do. So that might be an area where you might see probably some challenges with collaboration.
Right. Okay. One more question here. I think this is going to have to be our final one. I'm sorry, Andy. I'm not sure you'll be able to answer this one. I want to throw one to you, but I want to hear from both Simone and Andrew here. Just the question is,
before you let us off the hook,
is the medical devices and supplies healthcare subsector attractive, and which type of devices and products?
Simone.
Okay, we look at drug deliveries. That's part of medtech. And in the area of oncology, it's very common that sometimes the last mile delivery is not effective. In the case of primary liver cancer or pancreatic cancers, therapeutics can penetrate into it. In the case of pancreatic, probably less than 2% of systemic delivery will do the job. So we are looking at pressurized devices to power the therapeutics into the tumor. So we focus very much on drug delivery. And also the other areas of drug delivery is that large molecules takes a long time to deliver. And if we can come up with, let's say, a wearable device that you can, especially post-COVID, instead of going to the hospital, staying there for 5 hours or 6 hours, it costs people time, carbon, and it costs payer a lot of money. If it can be done at home, that's disruptive enough for us.
Thanks, Simone. Andrew, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's tough for me to comment exactly on medical device supplies, but I would say just the medical device industry in general is looking quite strong, and we're quite optimistic about it. I mentioned the Monarch system as one sort of device. We're in the area of orthopedics and just seeing how more and more folks in the growing middle class that you're seeing, everyone's being more active.
Sure.
You know, as a result of activity, you know, there's knee replacement, hip replacement, you,
Yep.
you name it. So I think you're going to have that, you know, trend going forward.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have. Thank you to each of our panelists so much for sharing your time and expertise with us today. The webinar is not over, however, we do have another segment for you to watch. Our Deputy Business Editor, Peggy Cito, recently sat down with Vikram Kumar, who leads Bain & Company's healthcare practice, to discuss more about the healthcare investment landscape in Asia.
Hi, Vikram. Thank you for joining the interview.
Hi, Peggy. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, this is we focus on in this 20 minutes interview. We focus on the investment trend in the healthcare sector, particularly in the Asia and China. So we will look at how companies or take advantage of the recent boom and spur growth. So over the course of last year, we noticed that there's an increasing government spending investment in the healthcare sector. But I would like to know more about the private sector. Could you please brief us the private sector investment in the healthcare sector?
Absolutely. So, I think what you see very much is, healthcare very much was at the front line of this pandemic. And while the sector was at the front line of this pandemic, it was not immune to much of the disruption we saw. And so in some cases, some segments in healthcare were realigned, and some trends, frankly, we saw get accelerated. Now, from a private sector investment perspective, last year was actually one of the strongest years we have seen on record with private sector investments in healthcare in Asia Pacific, largely because what you saw was investors really doubling down on some of the macro trends around an increasingly aging population, increasing affordability, and increasing access in markets in Asia Pacific, supported by, of course, a lot of the regulation that the government had opened up in these markets. And so what you saw in 2020 was about $16.9 billion of capital deployed by financial investors in Asia Pacific versus about 11 the prior year. I think what was very interesting was, for the first time, we had more deals in healthcare in Asia Pac than we did in North America. We shared this in our global healthcare private equity report. And what's interesting is you look at just the year to date this year, that momentum has continued.
Mm-hmm. So when you mentioned Asia, how about the investment in China?
So,
or the cross-border investment in China? Yeah.
So, China historically has always attracted a very large portion of investment. When we look at Asia Pacific, the markets which see the largest amount of activity historically have been China and India. Australia, Japan typically see fewer but bigger deals. And so, China's share of activity has continued to stay actually quite robust. And we've seen a lot of investments behind biopharma, medtech, digital health. And so that momentum just continues in China. I think it's been very strong.
Yeah, as you mentioned, healthcare is a very big market, from technology to services to drugs. So where is the money going? Can you brief us which sector can attract most private money?
Yeah. So, if you look over the last sort of 18, 24 months, a few themes we saw. I think the biopharma sector by far accounted for more than 50% of capital deployed. And if you look at where that capital was going, it was a few themes. One was really around fueling more innovation, and so investments behind CAR T, PD-1 types of therapies. You also saw in biopharma, an increasingly large amount of investment as globally manufacturers were looking to diversify their supply chains and API production. So you saw some broadening across markets. So biopharma continues to keep an important role. I think the other big theme we saw in the last year was just continued investment behind innovation, be it medtech, be it health tech. And so you saw investors put capital behind medtech companies in areas like TAVR. You saw a lot of capital deployed behind digital health. Frankly, it's hard to talk about healthcare today and not talk about digital health. And so many of the telemedicine or e-pharmacy platforms across India, China, Indonesia, Southeast Asia saw capital deployed behind them. And then the last big sector, the provider sector in Asia Pac has always been a mainstay for private equity. And what we saw was, again, investments behind hospitals in emerging markets like India and Southeast Asia. But in more developed markets, it was segments like primary care in Australia, senior care in markets like Japan. So, broad-based, but half of the capital was deployed in pharma, a lot around innovative pharma. Then there was health tech, med tech, and then finally provider.
Mm-mm. You mentioned about the senior services. So aging is an issue, or on the other hand, is a big market in Asia or in China. So do you see an increasing money flowing into this segment?
Yeah, I think it's a very important theme, and I think you can dissect this the aging related investments from a few angles. So there are, of course, investments around senior housing. They tend to be a little bit more real estate type focused investments. But if you look at a lot of the investments in medical technology, a lot of the cardiovascular therapies, etc. Again, they're more targeted to a aging and more chronic population. And again, a lot of the biopharma investments around oncology and others again tend to be these elements tend to uh, you know target more affect more seniors. And so people are looking at being able to take care of seniors from multiple angles, both from a senior care assisted living facility, but frankly a lot of it from how do you provide technology to help this rapidly aging population stay healthy.
Mm-mm. But in terms of investment, do you see a lot of cross-border investments this year or last year?
Yeah. So, I think over the last several years, we have seen quite a lot of cross-border investment, both in terms of companies looking to access capabilities in other markets to be able to bring to their home market, or capturing, investing behind larger profit pools. I think over the last sort of 12 months or so, we've seen a little bit less of that. Combination of some of the geopolitics that's happening. I think combination of also, with COVID and borders being closed, in many cases, people weren't able to travel across markets to be able to do the due diligence they needed. So we've seen, relative to the last 5 years, I think if you look at the last year or so, the cross-border investment activities actually slowed.
Do you expect this trend will continue?
No, I think that's the $1 million question, right? Is that we're seeing some version of decoupling happening in the global economy. So, I suspect that we will see some continuation of that, of the levels of cross border coming down. I don't think in the next 12, 24 months you'll see them where they were 3 years ago, but I think it'll come back a little bit more from where it was in the last 12 months. But again, it's a little bit like crystal ball gazing, where so much, it's such a dynamic situation that we'll all have
That's
to.
true. Mm-mm. So in terms of the finance trend, if you look at the Hong Kong IPO market, many of them are the biotech companies that also happen in the mainland stock markets. So what is the trend in this year or next year, in the next 18 months?
So, Peggy, I think what we've seen, right, is that there is so much investment behind the biopharma sector. If you look at Chinese healthcare, it's really reaching a stage where, from a focus on affordability and access for the last 5, 7 years, for the last decade or so, more recently the focus has become very much on innovation. And so you are seeing Chinese companies now at the forefront of new drug discovery, especially in biotech. And what you've seen is a lot of the capital being raised both from financial investors, but frankly in the capital markets. And the Hong Kong regulatory framework is very favorable to pre-revenue biotechs. And so we expect to see a continued amount of investment, and that trend continuing from all of what we see and hear, that just there is a lot of appetite for China innovation, both in China and globally, and there's a lot of capital that is waiting to be deployed to support it.
Mm-mm. But when we look at the U.S. market, in the past, maybe we will see some Chinese related companies will IPO in the US market. Those include the healthcare companies. Do you see this trend will slow down because of the tension between the two countries?
No, I think Becky, it's a great question. I don't know. I don't know about the impact of the tension between the two countries and how that will play out. But if you pull back, if you look over the last 5-7 years, what we've seen was a wave of Chinese healthcare companies that were listed in the U.S. And so they listed in either on the Nasdaq or the NYSE. But then many of these companies were taken private and then relisted in Hong Kong or in China. Largely because what they recognized was that the investor base in many of these, in the North American market, didn't fully understand the growth profile of these businesses, and so many of them, you look at the likes of Mindray and others that were listed in the U.S., went private and then relisted in either Hong Kong or China, and they've traded at very high multiples. And so I think that trend of Chinese entrepreneurs wanting to list in the U.S., which was prevalent 5-7 years ago. I think increasingly people want to access capital markets in Asia because the investor base understands the growth profile and the businesses are pretty well valued.
And Singapore are proposing SPAC, the special purpose acquisition companies. Do you think it is a new option for mainland companies or for Asian companies to exit or raise funds?
The SPAC boom has been quite interesting to see over the last 18-24 months. Last year we historically saw SPACs and IPOs. The share of SPACs and IPOs as an exit option almost doubled last year in most developed markets, and 1 out of every 5 SPACs that was raised was focused on healthcare. So the SPACs continue to be an important part of the ecosystem now. Where SPACs have historically seen a rise is when you have moments of uncertainty, a lot of market volatility, and so investors are companies are attracted to an environment where you have some certainty around pricing and a SPAC as an exit route. We haven't had very many SPACs in this part of the world, but like you said, I think Singapore is now exploring SPACs. There are a few first-time healthcare SPACs that are being raised in Asia. I think the jury is still out. As we move to a living with the pandemic or an endemic world, some of the uncertainty and volatility that attracted people to SPACs as an exit option, that I think the value prop of that is diminishing a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think it's still to be written.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So now I want to shift the topic to a little bit about the foreign investment into the mainland market, especially the foreign drug companies. I would like to zoom in the China's National Healthcare Securities Administration's the policy. I refer to the National Reimbursement Drug List. So the policy was adopted a few years ago, and they will update every year, and also they require those foreign companies on the list to cut the drug prices. After the few years of introduction of the launch, what is the impact? Do you see foreign companies are quite supportive of this policy?
Look, again, great question, and I think it's important to put this policy a little bit in context. If you look at reform in China and the direction the government has been going in, the first wave, right, in the 2010s, in the late 2000s and early 2010s, was all about driving access. And so with BMI insurance 95% plus, this current wave is really focused on both affordability and access to innovation. And so what you saw was with volume-based procurement and some of the high prices of patent originated drugs saw in China come down quite a bit. What you saw was the Chinese government actually expanded the NRDL, and so more drugs were added to it in the last few years that were innovative drugs. Now, I think that the trade-off again is as you look at China being one of the largest pharma markets in the world, there is a little bit of a for access to that volume, being able to bring pricing down, and what we are seeing is almost few different archetypes of healthcare companies, global healthcare companies. I think all of them recognize that China is a very important market. It is a large market for them, And so we see some companies that have said we will participate in the NRDL. And as a part of that, yes, we will see the price reduction on a per unit basis. But as the population of 1.3 billion people and some of the largest prevalence in certain diseases in the world will get the market access and the volume, because NRDL now allows them to be able to sell into the lower class, lower tier hospitals, which earlier these companies didn't have access to. They were typically focused on the bigger center of excellences in a Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou. And so you're seeing one archetype of company that says we are fully embracing this. We recognize that pricing will come down, but volumes will go up. There's another archetype of companies we are seeing, which is saying, look, let us be selective. For certain therapy areas, we will participate, but for certain therapy areas, we will not participate, because there is a small addressable market, and we believe people will pay for the innovation. And so even though they may not be in the NRDL, people will pay for that. So you see, two approaches, but on a broader basis, I think that there is a recognition that China is too important a healthcare market to not play in a meaningful way. And if it was just a price reduction without the accompanying volume, I think you would have a different answer. But because you've got the large volume market access that opens up, I think people are taking a longer term, more balanced view.
For those companies who do not join this list, how do they work? I mean, does the approach work?
I think it's still to be told. I think their focus has been mostly on some of the centers of excellence, some of the private sector hospitals, or the more advanced class 3 hospitals in bigger cities where the drugs are out of pocket. So what they have, at least what we're seeing, at least early on, is that there is some uptake of those drugs, but it's a small group of people who are willing to pay the premium. But again, in certain areas where you've got certain form of cancer, if your willingness to pay is higher for the leading drug in the world. But I think it's still early to tell how that's played out. But on balance, we see more companies saying, look, let us embrace this, and fewer companies are saying we'll be selective. There'll be some drugs in my portfolio I'll participate, some I won't.
So looking ahead, what is the future trend, you think, in the next 18 months?
So look, I think we see the appetite for investing in healthcare just continue to be very, very strong. The fundamentals behind the sector are very, very positive. I think what you saw in the last 18-24 months, for most governments, healthcare has now become the almost like the next national defense. You look across Asia Pac, all countries have, several countries, frankly, have actually gotten now some form of universal healthcare. You have seen new regulations supporting telemedicine, digital health, and so healthcare is at the top of the agenda. And I think we see investors continuing to bet behind it. There is a lot of innovation that is happening in China that that capital will continue to be deployed against. There is a lot of growth in healthcare as healthcare moves to becoming offline, from offline to online in O2O, and there's a lot of investment behind that. Again, bringing new technologies to market, and then we still, if we step back, many of the markets we are operating in are spending 2, 3, 4, 5% of GDP on healthcare relative to North America, which is close to between 18 and 20%. And so the growth is there. People are going to, continuing to invest behind it. This is a sector when during turbulence attracts capital. So we expect to see a lot of growth. There's also a lot of dry powder that is sitting, that's been raised, that is looking to find a home. Many investment funds last year, when we were at the height of the pandemic, had to slow down some portion of investment activity, and that's now come back. And frankly, some of the capital that was going into other sectors is now coming into healthcare. So we feel very good. I'm hopeful, the trends continue, and as we write our report for next year, we come back with another record year.
Okay, if your clients come to you and just ask you to pick one sector, so which sector will you pick for them?
Look, it's very hard to pick, but to me, I think I'm excited by just the opportunities in biopharma. It's attracted a lot of capital. There's a lot of great innovation that is happening in this part of the world, and so I feel very good about that one sector. And then within biopharma, there's innovative therapies. There are derivatives in terms of contract research organizations supporting the ecosystem. But that to me is the biggest opportunity in Asia over the next several years. That being said, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in digital health, in provider, and I think the challenge and the opportunity for an investor in healthcare in Asia Pac is that there is too much opportunity. So you've got to be disciplined. There's a lot of capital chasing these transactions. The valuations are high, and so you've really got to be focused on having a very clear thesis, thinking about how you would add value to a business, because the amount of appetite for a small number of assets is very high.
Thank you very much, Vakim. Thank you for your insight.
No, was my pleasure, and thank you so much again for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you.
That's all we have for today's segment. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and for those the speakers who shared their time with us. Before we go, I'd like to make our viewers aware of the upcoming Asia Summit on Global Health taking place on November 24th. This is Asia's premier thought leadership event on health innovation and investment, as well as a one-stop cross-disciplinary platform to foster international collaboration on global health issues. To register, you can scan the QR code on your screen for a special USD $50 discount with the promo code 01P390SCMP. Finally, we'd like to thank our sponsor, InvestHK, as well as our strategic partners, HKTDC and the Asia Summit on Global Health, and supporting organization One Health Tech. Thank you all for watching. We hope you enjoyed the webinar, and we look forward to welcoming you back next time.